Hey there, Todd from TrackJS here. I wanted to show you today how to get started with TrackJS for a brand new project, something that doesn't have a whole lot of errors in the code base already. We've been working on a new project lately called CertKit, which is a certificate lifecycle management tool. We've been using it internally for TrackJS for a while, and we're opening up the beta and starting to get some interest out there. But the website has gotten to the point where we're starting to introduce some JavaScript to it. And I want to install TrackJS on it so that I can understand the errors before they impact any users. So the first step here is we need to install some code. Now, I've installed the TrackJS snippet that I would get from the onboarding process, but I've already made a few modifications to it. First, I'm using the forwarding domain, which is a setting that you can create in your application. You basically set up a DNS entry for whatever you want it to be on your own on your own domain. So in my case, it's errors.certkit.io. And then you point that at one of our DNS names. And then we'll get a certificate and act as a forwarder for that. And the reason why this is interesting is that a lot of errors come from ad blockers or connections to things outside of the origin of your page. And so by doing this, I can report on those kind of errors. So I set up forwarding domain that we're going to forward all the errors to errors.certkit.io. I also just added a little thing where I check if it's my production environment before I do it. I really only want to track errors for my application in production. So once I've gone and done that, I start getting errors in my system. And I did that a couple of days ago. And I already have a ton of errors, actually, which is kind of crappy. Because if I take a look at these, none of these are anything that I think are my fault. The code that I'm running on that site right now is very, very simple, and none of this looks anything like what I want or anything that I think is anything to do with me. In fact, it looks like a lot of analytics and third-party stuff and Chrome extensions and other kinds of garbage. And so that's the first thing we really want to do, is we want to go into ignore rules, which is one of the most powerful features of TrackJS. Because most of the errors that we're going to get off of a web application are garbage. They're from those sort of things. And so to understand when something important is actually happening, we need to ignore all of those. Now, TrackJS gives you unlimited ignore rules with all of our account levels, so you can go ahead and add whatever you want. The only one that's on by default is this one, this ignore embedded Chrome Ceph Sharp. This is just a well-known crawler that we're very aware of. It generates errors on just about everybody's pages, so we ignore that for you. But then everything else is based on what kind of data we see. So if we go up here to suggested rules, we're going to see some suggestions based on the data coming in. And the first thing is ignore cross-origin third-party errors, or script error, which, isn't anything that we can do anything with. It's an error coming from a third party. Something's blowing up and being obfuscated by the browser. And that's nothing that I can fix. That's nothing that I can do. So I don't care. I'm going to add an ignore rule. So clicking that brings us over to this. I could customize this further if I wanted to do something with. But I just want to ignore script error in both of its variants on all applications. And we can see a little preview that there's currently 5 of these in the system. We're going to go ahead and delete those. And I never want to see those again. Now, there's a couple others. Ignore browser extensions. This is a good one. We've had 6 errors from browser extensions. So this will be all errors that have Chrome extension, Moz extension, or WebKit masked URL in the stack trace. In other words, it's not coming from your code. It's coming from somebody else's extension that happens to be throwing an error when they're on your site. Again, nothing that has anything to do with us. There's a couple of unhandled error things on the page already. I don't care. Let's ignore them. Let's get those out of here. A couple more. All right, so we have ignore common web crawlers. Has occurred 8 times. So this is errors that happen from things like Googlebot or Headless Chrome or Baidu Spider or Ahrefs or all kinds of different things. Different robots that crawl your site for various reasons that throw errors that aren't real people, generally aren't important. We have a couple of failed to fetches that came from them. I don't care. Let's get rid of them. Ignore those. And then the last suggestion is ignore Google Analytics network errors. And that's occurred 40 times. So this is any time we're sending messages out to a Google Analytics URL or any of its variants, and it blows up for whatever reason. Now, this can happen for a couple of reasons. Usually it's happening because they're running an ad blocker of some kind, and these domains are just straight up getting blocked by the browser. It could also be that Google's having there's a network issue or a couple of other things, but generally we don't care. Generally, an analytics failure is not something we care about. But I want to expand this because Google Analytics isn't the only analytics provider I'm using on the site right now. So because advertising on the internet sucks, I end up with lots and lots of different analytics-y services to report on different things. And I don't care about any of them. So I'm going to expand this and say, I want to ignore analytics network errors. And I also want to ignore anything that comes from i.posthog.com. There's 74 of those. Let's get rid of those. Bing.com. Or say reddit.com, and we'll ignore all of those. And there's 106 of those in the system right now, and none of those are anything that I want in my system. So let's save that and clear all of that out. Now, with all of these rules in place, that should process over the next few seconds to actually delete all of these, all of the errors that match that. So if we go and take a look at this, these are the only errors that are left. There's a couple of these unexpected token object.entries is not a function. And so let's actually look at one of these and see if we can figure out what it is. Source extensions external integration. Posthog core. All right, so this is also a thing that is not mine. This is something that came from somebody else. Specifically, it came from Posthog doing something. And so I don't want that. That's a bunch of garbage. Let's ignore that one too. So we're going to go here into ignore rules. We're going to go ahead and edit this, or we're going to create a new rule that says ignore posthog errors. And if the stack trace contains iposthog.com, we are going to ignore that. So that should clear out these last few here in a minute. Now, once I have all my ignore rules in place, now I need to understand when do I need to care? And that's where we get to notifications. So this is a brand new application. There's not a whole lot involved in it yet. And so the only thing that I really want to know about is I want to know when a new error happens. I shouldn't really have any problems with error trends and error rates and stuff like that, because at this point, every error that I get is something that I think is interesting that I should look into and either create an ignore rule or fix it. And so I want to set up a new error notification. Now, there's a lot of times when that could be super noisy. You get a one-off person testing something or throwing a new kind of error. And so I maybe don't want a notification for every single one. And so I set it that minimum users affected 2. There has to be at least 2 people that have this error before I get it. And then I just send it to my inbox. Now that could be a Slack channel or whatever, but for right now, I'm just going to use my email. And so then that's it. Now I should be ignoring the things that are ignored. The errors that come into the system should be real. And when I get a new one, I can either ignore it or I can fix it because I should have good data in my system. So that's how I set up TrackJS for CertKit. For real right now. Go ahead and get TrackJS started on your application soon.